be your session moderator, as well as I'll have the responsibility for handling Ask the Question box. Please listen very carefully to the following session instructions. For those of you who need CEUs for LPC, LMFT, and our social work, we'd like you to enter the sign-in code that I'm going to announce in just a very short while. There is a sign-in link in the chat box. That's where you have to go and sign in so that you'll be able to receive your CEU. But please remember, it's only going to be live for about 15 minutes. Then very near the end of the presentation, please listen for the sign out code to place in the sign out link that's going to also be in the chat box toward the end of the session. You're going to need to provide your name and the license types for your CEUs when you fill out the conference evaluation at the end of the conference. And remember, you must complete the conference evaluation in order for you to be eligible to receive your CEU. You're going to receive your CEU certificates as soon as possible after the conference at the email address that you use to register. Now, we hope that everyone is going to fill out your conference evaluation, regardless of whether you'd like a CEU or not. The conference evaluation link is going to be posted in the chat box as well, and also on the Pathways to Hope website. Now, throughout the conference, please only use the Ask the Question box to post questions for our speaker this afternoon. Use the chat box to engage with other participants or to ask any technical questions and to find the CEU sign in and sign out links. And I'm going to follow the Ask a Question box and combine like questions and then share with the presenters, but not until the very end. Now, do remember that personal information can be seen by all. So please consider this when you're posting either in the chat or the Ask a Question boxes. Now, listen up. The CEU sign-in code for this session is 53. The CEU sign-in code is 53. And now, I'd like to introduce our presenter this afternoon. She is Reverend Joangela Waters. Representing, her topic is Heal the Healer Caregivers Symposium. And with that, it's all yours, Reverend Waters.
Thank you so much for that invitation and introduction. I'm so excited to be here with you today. I want to acknowledge and appreciate everyone who's coordinated this effort for the 5th annual and first virtual conference. So I know that's been a challenge, and I appreciate you for all that you're doing for this community. I'd also like to give a shout out and recognize my sister, friend, mentor, and the founder of Heal the Healer, San Antonio, Dr. Melissa Walker, who's been a colleague, a mentor, a friend, passionate and compassionate in leading our colleagues in the Heal the Healer effort. As the author of The Person Beside the Bed, which was published in 2013, a lot of what you hear today is going to come from my experiences, some of my research as a sociologist, and certainly from my spiritual background. So here we go. I love my introductory slide. I am a caregiver. I'm tired, and that's okay. And then you see all of the different ways and things that can add to that fatigue. On this slide, you will see 2 links that I like. There are so many organizations like AARP and the National Alliance of Caregiving that help us to understand why it's so important to focus on caring for the caregiver. This was something I learned as a caregiver from 2000 to 2010. And I have to tell you, for the first 5 years, I was winging it. I didn't even think of myself as a caregiver. I was just taking care of people I loved. My husband had been diagnosed with a very rare cancer. My mother had non-Hodgkin's. They were diagnosed on the same week in 2000, February 9th. And I, at that moment, did not see myself as a caregiver. But I have to tell you, over the years, these links and others like it have helped me in that season and out of that season to know how important it is, y'all, to focus on the caregiver as well. Statistically, I like to look at statistics. Caregiving in the US 2020. Now, do know some statistics may be a little behind in terms of the years, but the trends are the same. So you will see 2015, 2020. For example, the number of Americans providing unpaid care has increased over the last 5 years from 43.5 million to 53 million. And let's just be very realistic and be very present with the COVID-19 pandemic. I personally will be interested to see the statistics that we have by the end of this year in terms of caregivers. Family caregivers now encompass more than 1 in 5 Americans. And that's also connected to the idea that caregivers themselves are in worse health than they were 5 years ago. The demand for caregiving rises with an aging population. We are living longer. We're living longer. And as we live longer, we get more diseases, we have more physical issues, and I would suggest even mental and emotional issues. Demographically, I'd mentioned the first one to you. I think this is so important. The value, if we had to put a price, and I'm talking about informal caregivers, family caregivers, if we had to put a price on what they do, the estimated value in 2013 was $470 billion worth of work, if that was a paid job. And that was in 2009, it was less. It was 450 billion. In 2007, it was 375 billion. So if we were talking about 2020, 7 years later, the trend would be the same. We're probably over $5 billion in the value of what an unpaid family caregiver does. 65% of care recipients are female with an average age of 69.4. These demographics are important. You know, this is something we observe, but as a sociologist, the statistics paint a picture. 45% of the recipients are aged 18 to 45, male, while 33% of recipients, care receivers, are aged 50 and higher, are male. And there is your link. You can go and check those. Let's look at, on average, caregivers spend 13 days a month. That's just an average. So certainly from the greatest number of days to the least, 13 days a month on tasks such as shopping, food preparation, housekeeping, laundry, transportation, 6 days a month on feeding, dressing, grooming, an average. 13 hours per month looking for care services, trying to find information. I remember in 2000, 2005, when my husband was being treated at MD Anderson, I spent a significant amount of my time as a caregiver for him and my mother, looking up their condition, trying to find ways to understand what was going on and find people who could help me. The last bullet here says caregivers report holding significant decision-making authority. I'll talk about that later. Here again is another demographic page. And I'll just cover average age, 49.2 years old. And then distribution of care recipient, 69.4. We covered that. There is that link you can go to. This is interesting. 57% of caregivers report that they do not have a choice about performing clinical tasks, and that this lack of choice is self-imposed. What does that mean? That means when, as a caregiver, my family member or close friend, the person I'm taking care of, has medical concerns and medical treatments that must be done at home, I feel like I need to do that. Whether you're a spouse, parent, daughter, son, sibling, extended family, at some point in your life, if you keep living, you are going to experience the vast array of descriptions on this slide. Long-term care for loved ones with dementia, cancer, diabetes, terminal physical issues, PTSD, and now with the pandemic are certainly in our face. I love these images, and some of us could probably submit pictures from our own phones that mimic these images as we take care of loved ones, or we know people who do. I call this informal family caregiving the blessed burden. The blessed, what an oxymoron. What a paradox. It's a blessed burden. As you can see, I chose these images because there were many days when my face looked like that as a caregiver. Caregiving requires commitment, love, patience, compassion. We're talking about family caregivers here. But it also puts us in a space of burden and concerns and being worried and wondering if we're doing a good job. One of the things that I experienced as a caregiver, and many of you can attest to, was resentment about the situation. When my husband was diagnosed in 2000, he wasn't even 50 years old. He was 40 years old. We'd only been married about 9 years. I resented, I had thoughts about the past, I had fear about the future, and I had frustration that my life was going to change over time. But one of the things that I want to encourage you as you take away inspiration today is that you have to acknowledge that resentment. And you do that by finding someone to confide in who won't judge you. That information, that recommendation is free. Feeling unappreciated. You know, as a caregiver, when all of these roles start kicking in, role strain, role conflict, you can easily play the shoulda, woulda, coulda game with your mind. I should have cooked more nutritious meals. I should have been more attentive. I would have done this. You can't do that. Psychologically, that's damaging. When you're feeling unappreciated, you've got to discern what your motives and your intentions are as a caregiver. My motive is love. My motive is passion, compassion. My intention is to do as much as I can to the best that I can. Staying focused on the big picture. That person in the bed is the critical and crucial part of this role. And staying focused on the entire picture of being a caregiver can be difficult. But again, it goes back to finding someone that you can talk to about it, whether they be a professional or a close friend who won't judge you. And then understanding that the reward for being a caregiver is not in making your loved one well. It is in doing your best. This was what kept me going, y'all. And this is my quote. This is daily what I repeated to myself. On your best day, there is no such thing as perfection. And on your worst day, you are doing better than you think. If there's someone watching this and in this class, in this session, in this workshop today, if you take a picture of this screen and copy it off and keep it somewhere where you can see it. Before I figured this out, there were many days when the end of the day, I would cry and I would wonder, did I do a good job? Did I cover everything? There's no way you can cover everything. There's no such thing as perfection. And on your worst day, you did better than you think you did. Feelings of being overwhelmed. I just kind of put up some sentences here, and I guarantee you I felt every one of these. And if you are a caregiver, if you're coming out of caregiving, or if you're in the middle of it, you know some of these feelings: denial, depression, anger, anxiety, panic, low productivity, nervousness, loss of interest, self-blame, blaming others, snapping, overreacting, helplessness, hopelessness. Now, I felt these things, and you may have felt these things, or you know someone who is, but the where we're trying to get is that these feelings and emotions don't overwhelm us to the point that we're stuck in a rut. You have to reach out. Professional help is key. And I learned a term called respite that I had never heard of before. Respite. I had a person who came to me and said, in the middle of my caregiving and when it was getting really difficult, you need to take a day off. I'm going to watch your loved one for 2 or 3 hours, and you get out of here and you go take care of yourself. It was the most difficult thing for me to do, but over time, I learned the value of accepting respite care. Talk to your pastor, ministers of counseling, spiritual partners. Have someone come in and minister to you as you're going through these emotions, someone to come in and pour into you. And if there is a grief ministry that you can join, participate in that. Some of the other things that caregivers can experience, and you may not think much of it when you're in it, but other people can probably see it and you're feeling the brunt of it. Changes in eating habits, unwanted weight gain or loss. And let me tell you, during my caregiving season, the last 2 years, I gained over 30 pounds and didn't even realize what was happening to my health. My sleep patterns changed. For me, it was not getting enough. I felt tired. Some of the things that gave me pleasure, I did not enjoy or felt too guilty to try to enjoy them. There were days when I was agitated. And again, days when nothing you did was good enough. Now listen to my caregivers, those who have come out, those who are going in. The person in the bed is feeling things that sometimes we may not be able to understand. My husband used to have a term, piece of the way, piece of the way. People can only go with you a piece of the way. And so that person in the bed may be experiencing things and lashing out or saying things to you that may make you feel like what you're doing is not good enough. Don't let that overwhelm you. Understand. Try to see the big picture. Death or suicide. There's the feeling for the caregiver. When I went to palliative care counseling at MD Anderson, this was one of the questionnaire items. Now, I had never felt the urge to die or suicide or attempt it, but believe you me, this can get so hard that there are people that do, and we need to be aware that this is a symptom, a common symptom of depression. Guilt can sneak up on you. It can cause stress. I mentioned earlier role strain and role conflict as you're juggling all of these things. Life does not stop because you're a caregiver. Life does not stop because you're taking care of your mom or your spouse or your child or a family member or a friend. Life does not stop, and it can cause stress and strain, and guilt is a normal emotion. One of the things that I had to learn to do was to stop and reflect on why I was feeling guilty. In fact, much of what you're hearing from me today came from my intentional effort to stop and write down how I was feeling. I was feeling anger because informal caregiving has a serious learning curve. What do you do? Again, I journaled. That was, let me tell you a little, it's kind of it's funny now, but at MD Anderson, when I was in the palliative care program with my husband, they needed some people to be in a research project. So I said, sure, I'll participate. They needed caregivers. And so when I filled out the questionnaire to see if I qualified as a caregiver, some of it was, do you journal? What do you do? How do you feel? These emotions that I'm talking about. But when they got my questionnaire back, they said, you're not depressed enough. You're not sad enough to be in this project. And I was like, what? And I found out, just trying to figure it out, that the reason I wasn't depressed enough is because I kept finding ways instinctively to get those feelings out on the table, to talk about them, to write about them. I kept understanding instinctively that I was not a superhuman being. We are not superhuman. At the end of the day, I learned that whatever I didn't get done, it will wait, and it will be waiting for me tomorrow. I quickly learned that the people that I was depending on, who dropped the ball, who didn't do what they needed to do, could be forgiven, and that I would be able to make it. I love this. Caregivers are often the casualties, the hidden victims. No one sees the sacrifices they make. If I may be transparent with you, as a pastor's wife, a lot of the attention was going, of course, to the pastor, because he was the shepherd, he was the caregiver, he was the one who had been leading the flock. And y'all, there were many days when people didn't ask me how I felt, and people didn't realize the sacrifices I made. Until one day, my husband's pastor came in the room and said, "Jo, how are you feeling? No one really knows or understands or thinks about the person beside the bed." Let's go back to some of those. We talked about psychological, emotional issues, physical issues. I mentioned earlier that the statistics are showing that caregivers are in the worst physical condition than ever. I experienced guilt with this in those pounds that I told you that I gained. I also had a lump in my shoulder that was causing great pain. And this was in the midst of the most critical and crucial part of the caregiving. And I was having trouble when I was lifting, when I was bathing, and it was hurting. But I felt too guilty to say to my loved one that I was in pain. I felt too guilty to go to the doctor. You have to give yourself permission to ask for help. Let me reiterate that this workshop, while the person in the bed is the most important person when we're dealing, the person beside the bed, you need help, and you have to give yourself permission to ask for help. I wrote in my journal, y'all, I cannot be all things to all people, and I should have put all the time. We are not superhuman. When you're dealing in the caregiving season, and that person, that care receiver that you love so much, that blessed burden you're experiencing of being passionate and compassionate and still bearing the brunt of denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. This comes from Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and we're familiar, most of us, with the stages of grief. I experienced anticipatory grief. The loved ones that I was caring for, 2 at one time, had terminal illnesses. Now, my faith is strong, and I believe that God could heal. But I also had to learn to believe that whether they were healed on earth or in heaven, they were healed. And that led me into this process of anticipatory grief. I had to learn. And if you're in the middle of this, you have to learn. Time is a healer, and life can and will go on. You have to resolve, restore, remember, and release. Resolve what? Resolve the guilt, resolve any anger, resolve and forgive people. You have to restore your emotional and your mental health. You have to find ways. You have to remember all of the good things. This was with my husband. We started taking more pictures. We started inviting people over when he had the physical energy. We had more birthday parties. We celebrated everything we could celebrate. And then you have to release. And for me, it was releasing what would happen into God's care. On some of those links that I showed you, there is a caregiver self-assessment questionnaires that are available. If you are in the caregiving season, I admonish you, take one of those questionnaires, and you'll be surprised what you learn about yourself and what you learn even today, ways that you can help to get through this season. Here's an interesting word. I didn't make it up. Exhaustlessness. Exhaustlessness. The definition, being both fatigued and restless at the same time. Oh my goodness. I ran across this word and it gave me a way to define how I felt so many nights where I just wanted to lay my head down. But when I did, I couldn't sleep. There's so much to do, so little time to do it. And the only thing in my mind was to keep moving. I got to keep moving. I've got to keep moving. A feeling like taking a sleeping pill and an energy drink at the same time. Can you imagine? Paradox. Exhaustlessness becomes the very fuel that energizes the caregiver. I don't know about you, but I experienced it. And if you've been a caregiver, maybe you can identify. If you haven't, put this in your arsenal of understanding. I had to sit through appointments. I had to manage multiple priorities. Remember, life doesn't stop. We still had kids. We had grandkids. I still was working. There were multiple things that you have to handle, not to mention fending off sleep despite heavy eyes and a heavy heart. There was a point, y'all, when I felt like I could not lay down because I would miss doing something. I cannot even describe with words except exhaustlessness. This slide is pretty busy, but I'm just going to touch point here. Caring for others runs the risk of burnout, but self-centered exhaustlessness provides a return on the investment. Wow. Oh, Reverend Joe, you just said that we have to watch out for exhaustlessness. But how ironic that when you're feeling burnout, exhaustlessness actually gives you the energy to keep going. That's heavy. The giver and the receiver are one and one and get what one gives. It's so hard to convince the caregiver to slow down. It's so hard to trust somebody who's telling you to take care of yourself first. And it's so hard to believe that you can do it. taking care of themselves as they move reflexively towards the need of one who is suffering. At times, that energy is unlimited. But you have to engage yourself with that team of caregivers. You're the informal caregiver, but engage yourself with that formal team. Allow people in palliative care or in the clinics or in the hospitals to help you to learn how to navigate and how to take care of yourself while you're dealing with the things that the person in the bed needs. You need family members, you need friends, you need colleagues. And while you feel like you're flying solo, so there was to me, there was nothing out there until I got to the palliative care and discovered all of these websites and all of these articles. You do not have to fly solo. As we go a little bit further, the final bullet, finally, I ask that you would allow trusted others to shoulder some of the burdens. What does that mean? I asked my family to do the groceries for me, to wash the clothes for me. I learned how to divvy out the responsibilities. I learned how to ask for help. Exhaustlessness will pass, but you've got to learn in the middle of all that love and compassion and selfless compassion and burnout, you've got to learn to ask for help and trust others. Resilience. My husband called me the bounce back queen while we were going through all of this. It's resilience. You have to be. Resilience is crucial because change is constant. Resilience is a matter of choice. You have to intentionally decide that you are going to keep standing. David encouraged himself in the Lord his God. 1 Samuel 30:6. He had lost everything. He didn't know his family, his goods. People were turning against him, and David encouraged himself in the Lord his God. Resilience comes from being able to accept that there is nothing constant about life except change. And the fact that God does not change. I've talked to you about emotional, I've talked to you about physical. This is my spiritual rock. God does not change. Life changes. And I have to keep encouraging myself in the Lord. Connecting and communicating, I've mentioned that all through this. You've got to connect to survive. Have you ever heard the term wounded healer? A wounded healer is someone who's struggling themselves, but trying to work towards healing others. You need to be cared for. This potpourri of pictures and images, the to-do list, I remember those. Some of you may be writing lists now and calendars and this appointment and that appointment, and life goes on. You've got to go pay the bills. You've got to call the insurance company. You've got things to do and you have to keep a list. Caregiving can be overwhelming. Time to heal. Remember I talked about the respite? Finding time just to sit, to meditate, to allow yourself to think or not think, but just to rest. Look at that image of the rope, the snapping rope, the help. Listen, self-care is not selfish. If I do not take care of myself, if I burn out, if I'm so empty, I cannot help anyone else. COVID-19. I gave some thought to this because caregivers need to be intentional in taking care of themselves. This is what I've had to do. And I'm not caregiving season right now, but I am so thoughtful about the people across this country, across this world, who either have contracted COVID-19 or having to take care of people who are contracting it, and then having to deal with the frustration and the inconsistency. Take breaks, y'all. If you're this person I'm talking to, or take a break. You cannot watch every news story. You cannot read every social media posting and walk away at the end of the day in a good emotional state. You've got to take a break. You've got to make some time to unwind. Take the dog for a walk. You go for a walk. Get on the bicycle. Do a crossword puzzle, Sudoku. Do something that allows you to relax, release, and enjoy, even if it's momentary. Connect with others. Talk with people. Answer that phone if somebody's calling to check on you. And I found that calling to check on others makes me feel better as well. You are not alone. I've said that throughout this presentation. Support groups are there. The links are there. Technology has made it so easy for us to find ways to connect and recognize when you may need more help. Let me sit on this point for a minute. As a congregational care pastor, as a minister, when I was teaching, as a presenter, as someone who loves and serves people, I had to learn the importance of professional help, of a therapy or counselor who can allow me to help walk through some of my feelings and some of the things that are confounding me or concerning me. There's nothing wrong with it. In fact, having help, having a psychologist or therapist will help you to survive and to stand through this season. These are, I wanted to provide you with current websites. And these are, if you want to take a picture or you go back and you view this presentation in the recording, be sure if you don't need this information, get it for somebody else. Because remember I said either you, somebody in your family, a friend is going to either need caregiving or you're going to have to be providing caregiving. Share this information. Share this information. I wanted again to address pandemics. Pandemics can be stressful. We've seen them before, but we know of the history, but this generation, most of us have never been in this place before. So let me just put this into a current commentary. The coronavirus may be stressful for people. Fear and anxiety about a new disease and what could happen. We see it. It's overwhelming. It's causing strong emotions in adults and in our children. Public health actions such as social distancing can make people feel isolated. We see it. Make people feel lonely. And it increases again our emotional stress and anxiety. But we know that wearing a mask and washing our hands and isolating helps reduce the spread. But what about those caregivers who have to do that within their home while they're taking care of someone who's contracted the disease? Much of what we're talking about today in terms of supporting and encouraging caregivers is very useful right now. Coping with the stress in as healthy a way as you can makes you and our community stronger. Much of what we share today is useful in this pandemic. The last thing I want to cover with you is I talked about statistics. I talked about the psychological issues. I talked about some of the physical issues and the emotional. But what about preparedness? This is another paradox, y'all. Whoever thought that taking care of yourself as a caregiver meant being prepared? One of the most precious and lasting gifts we can leave our loved ones is a plan and a detailed directive in the event of our own incapacitation. It is critical, I learned this, and I'm passing it on for free, that as a caregiver, you've got to be proactive about mental health and emotions. You are going to have to make critical health, financial, and personal decisions. Here's the key word: in advance. Medical, legal discussions and decisions are difficult enough while you're in the season. But how difficult is it for people who have to make these decisions after demise or hospitalization? It is important. It is an act of love, y'all, to be ready, to have pertinent, important family information gathered, notarized, in order, and in a place where your caregiver can know what is needed, what is required, and what is requested in dealing with end-of-life issues. I am a living witness. I'm a testimony that it is an act of love. My mama, mama's blue lockbox, she had a lockbox and she said, "Come here." I was 37. "I want to show you what I want." And I didn't like it at first, but when mama experienced her demise, that blue lockbox helped me to be able to grieve without having to worry about financial and legal issues. Trust me on that. It had a will in it. My husband also had a living trust. It was not fun at all. It was a very morbid time for me to sit at the table and have these discussions. Having legal documents and wishes of your family member will give you the time and the peace you need to deal with the grief later on. There are just like there are, I apologize for that. Just like there are websites for statistics, there are websites to help you to gather the paperwork you need to get these documents together. I know it sounds morbid, but consider this a very important part of my presentation. That part of taking care of yourself as a caregiver means making sure your house is in order. After the caregiving, we all have heard this too shall pass. We know things don't stay the same. After caregiving, I had to unlearn the role. I had to re-socialize myself back into my society, my micro society and my macro. I had to relearn how to be a contributing member because I had been contained in this life of a caregiver. And I had to realize that grieving was part of my process. This is you're like, Reverend Joe, you've given us so many paradoxes and so many contradictions. I had to grieve not being a caregiver anymore. And if there's somebody in this workshop and presentation that understands that, you will have thrust yourself into this role. And now your loved one is gone. And you have to unlearn. You have to re-socialize. And you have to realize that there's another grieving season. This is me. This is for you. Life has knocked me down a few times. It's shown me things I never wanted to see. I've experienced sadness and failures. But one thing is for sure, and hopefully we can say this together, I always get up. Always get up. Much of what I've shared with you today, again, comes from my book, The Person Beside the Bed. It is available. If you have Amazon Prime, you can get this book for free through Kindle Unlimited. You can also get it as a Kindle book. I think it's $8.95. But if you want to read a little bit more, the caregiving questionnaire is in there. I have gifted this book to so many people, And I thank God that I was able to share my experience and to allow people inside this this season. If you know someone who is caregiving, coming out of it or going into it, share this information that you learned today. Set up ways to help others. If your heart is compassionate and passionate when it comes to those who are having to take care, and look, this COVID season, I have vowed to myself to use what I know to help people get through this season. Thank you so much.
My goodness. Dr. Waters, your presentation has just been awesome. So powerful. So many wonderful things that you've shared with everyone today regarding caregiving. It's just, I'm overwhelmed. I really am. Before I get to talking too much and forget, let me remind the conferees that need to sign out for their CEUs. You have a code and it's 42. The sign out code is 42, and the link is going to be in the chat box, and it'll be up for 15 minutes. I can hardly speak right now. I really can hardly speak. I was trying to take a few notes on what you were saying, and I thought, don't even try. There's just too much. I'm going to wait until I see the recording of your PowerPoints. But I loved when you shared on your best days, there's no such thing as perfection. And on your worst days, you're doing better than you think. My goodness, that's an awesome something to remember. And the fact that if we are empty vessels who've not taken care of ourselves, we can't be of very much help to anyone else. You're wonderful. You are just wonderful. We only have a few questions in our Ask a Question box, and I'm going to pose those to you now so that you can answer for everyone. The first question coming from Jenny Bishart. How is caregiving for a loved one with mental illness any different than other illnesses?
How is caregiving?
That's for you, Dr. Waters.
For someone with mental illness.
How is caregiving for?
So right. I've given thought to that just for myself, but I would imagine it's much harder because you really need that. You need the collective body. You need the village to help you. You need case managers. There's a lot of extra people involved when we're dealing with a mental illness and watching out for your own. So we're talking about mental, whether it's the psychological, emotional, the physiological. I would think it's much harder. I've not experienced that part of it. I did experience the decline of my loved ones' psychological and mental health, because I can't even imagine what it's like to be the one who's experiencing the illness, and then I'm supposed to help you, and I can't understand all that you're going through. I would say be sure to arm yourself with more help. Don't be afraid to look up the websites, find the people, talk to people who have endured that, so that they can encourage you and give you the best practices. And every case is different. Every case is different. Bless you who asked that.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much, Doctor. And the next question, what's available mental health wise that's comparable to palliative care? And do other communities offer respite care for those who are caring for someone with a mental illness?
Yeah. So hopefully you'll go back to this recording and get those links, because all of those links, especially the AARP and the National Alliance, they have links and they have sublinks for that respite care, They have, look, it's been 10, let's see, 2009. As far back as 2009, those websites have helped me, and they're still putting out new information for those of you who are caring with someone. What was the other part of that question? I apologize.
The other part was, just a minute, do other communities offer respite care for those that are caring with someone with mental illness?
Now, the reality is during COVID, you may not find much of that, but pre-COVID and prayerfully post-COVID, there are communities, and again, links and websites and organizations that you can just Google in and find a plethora of groups that help with respite care. You've got to do your research. You've got to do your research.
Okay, next question. How can we, and this is coming from Margaret Hawthorne, how can we encourage the faith community to come alongside the caregiver for support?
Hi, Margaret. How can we encourage the faith community to come alongside the caregiver for support? One, we got to talk about it more. For me, I realized that I grew up in church all my life. I was in the faith community, and I saw people being caregivers, but they never talked about it. My mother was a caregiver, but she never talked about it. No one called it that name. No one talked about words like respite, and there were no conversations. When we go to church on a Sunday, from one end of the pew to the other, there are people who are caregiving, but we don't talk about it. So the first thought that comes is that we've got to offer a space and a place where people can come and invite them in. Churches that have small groups, that's a great way to bring people in, because once we start talking about it, they'll come. They will come. And as pastoral care, as chaplains, that's what we're trained to do. We're trained to come alongside. Got to talk about it, and we've got to make the spaces available for those who are in need of that type of support.
You are exactly right, Dr. Waters. And I would like to remind Margaret and others to go back and take a look at some of the previous recordings, especially from the plenaries this morning. There was the plenary number 3 that's entitled Bridges to Care of St. Louis, expanding the role of faith-based organizations to support referral and access to behavioral health care. That was a really good one. And where do we go from here was another plenary that spoke to that specific concern. And I can't remember just off the top of my head the others, but do go back and take a look at the recordings that involved faith information on faith-based communities and things. So now, next question. What suggestions can you offer about how siblings can offer best care for their own parents?
Woo! That's a good one.
That's a very good one from Manuel.
Oh, in my book, I addressed that. Now, I'm an only child, but as a pastor's wife and coming through these different seasons and watching families, that is a hot topic. One thing I noticed, there's always one who becomes the primary care, that siblings are willing to put that responsibility on that one. So that can be a tough thing among siblings in terms of sharing the burden. And then just as people, when we see something's getting done and it's something that we're not good with, in other words, everybody that's born of the same parents cannot produce the same feelings and emotions. So every sibling is different. There are siblings who they shy away from the caregiving, but maybe they can do other things. This is what I say in the book. Find the gift that each sibling has. Everybody's not going to be able to bathe. Everybody's not going to be able to transport. Everybody's not going to be able to sit in it. But maybe there's a sibling that can cut the yard. There's a sibling that can do the groceries. there's a sibling that can catch that laundry. Find the gift of each sibling. So, and that's important because imagine myself as a sibling. I'm not doing well with mama or daddy or whoever's sick. I'm not doing well with it. And I'm feeling isolated and I'm not feeling like I want to get involved, right? But if you say to me, hey, Joe, you are really good at making oatmeal and mama needs some oatmeal. So could you make a batch of oatmeal for the week and just be responsible for that? Imagine what we can do if we think outside the box and we try to involve each other in the area of our strength. Even as siblings, we're not alike. We're different. So if I'm the primary caregiver, I want to find that gift and invite my siblings and extended family members in so they can be included in a way that they can feel comfortable. Because that mental, emotional thing, it affects everybody, not just me. So that's when to find those gifts and ask people to employ those gifts.
That's wonderful. Let's see. At what point did you decide that hospice care was what you and your husband needed for help? Many people think of hospice as being a very scary thing, and I'm glad Cynthia asked this question. I faced that too with my mother, as I was caring for her. So, do I need to read it again?
The H word. It's the H word. Let me be transparent with you. When we were with MD Anderson, we were with them from 2000 to 2009. In May of 2009, they released us from treatment. They released him from treatment. And we went into the palliative care meetings, and the case manager came in. And as educated and as influential as we were, when the word hospice was spoken, you should have seen our faces. We rode back from Houston to San Antonio in silence. Later on, the conversation was, he said, at what point would you put me in hospice? And I said, at the point where I could hurt you or hurt myself. And that was my litmus there. If I cannot take care of you properly, and if I could hurt myself or hurt you, and the day I called hospice, that was the boundary, that was the limit, and it was the saddest day of my life. But I wish I had done it sooner, because once they came in and they came alongside me, they didn't take over, they didn't dictate, they taught me, they showed me things, they showed me a better way. And we were able to work together. Hospice they were angels. And I still communicate with some of the ladies that came to help us. And I learned, and I'm trying to tell people, don't be afraid of the H word. It doesn't mean you got one foot in the grave. It means that somebody's coming alongside you to help make your life easier so you can take better care of the person in the bed.
And I say ditto to that. Oh my goodness, so much, Dr. Waters, because with my own experience with hospice, which I had always been afraid of it because I hadn't ever heard anything good about hospice. But when that organization did come in, I'm telling you, they were so wonderful. Hospice, if it's a really good one, they don't only take care of the terminally ill person, they take care of the whole family.
Yes,
they do as much as they possibly can for the whole family. And I would recommend the use of a good hospice to everyone if you're, ever faced with that. Okay, now Manuel also had a question about the NAMI, the local connection support groups that are offered. NAMI San Antonio does offer several support groups, and to find out information about them, there are many. Please go to our local website, NAMI San Antonio, and there is a link there that will give you dates, days and times that you can be involved with NAMI Connection. Absolutely life-changing.
I might add that Heal the Healer San Antonio, we do a conference every year. It's usually in October. So look out for information for that. And it's for formal and informal caregivers. Last year we did it at Incarnate Word. So, but look out for information and go to our website, Heal the Healer San Antonio.
Wonderful. Okay. All right. I want to just make sure that I did get, I think I didn't miss anyone's questions. So what a really great day. We hope that all of you conferees have been inspired by all the presentations that you've heard over the past 2 days. Please don't forget, fill out your conference evaluation for us, because that's going to be so helpful for us with our planning for next year. And for those of you that need CEUs, remember, you won't be able to have that process completed unless you do complete a conference evaluation. But we want to receive that from everyone. The link is in the chat box. And thank you for joining us for the last 2 days. We hope to see you next year. Please stay connected. And Dr. Waters, thank you once more on behalf of everyone here. Thank you so much. Your information has been so powerful. You've taken my breath away.
Oh, thank you so much, girl. I appreciate you and your spirit. You have a beautiful spirit. Thank you.
Oh, could you tell my husband that?
I will. Let me text him right quick.
All right. Thank you. Good day, everyone. See you next year.
Thank you.